Okay, let's open the room to our guests. Welcome, everyone. Guests are coming in now. And welcome to the event today. My name is Scott, and I'm a science communications trainer based here in Tokyo, Japan. I've been working with researchers and technologists for more than 20 years, helping them to communicate their science to a global audience. And I'm very happy to be here on behalf of our colleagues at Sci-Finity Publishing. We're very excited to start a new partnership together with Sci-Finity. So welcome everyone. If you're joining us from the Sci-Finity community, welcome. Very nice to meet you, and thanks for joining us. If you're joining us from the Sci-Train community, again, thanks for always joining our events. Tonight is an important topic, and we hope that it'll be useful for you, and you can follow these principles in your research and writing. Our speaker today is my friend and colleague, Professor Gareth Dyke. Gareth, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yes, not too bad, Scott. How are you? How's things in Tokyo? Everything going well?
Going very well. It's a bit exciting right now. We have a massive thunderstorm happening outside. I'll have to keep muting myself so you don't hear the thunder cracks interrupting your talk today.
Okay, cool. Well, here in the UK, it's nice and sunny, a bright morning. Why don't you let us know if you're joining us, where you're from? Give us a indication in the chat as to where you are joining us from today. We'd love to hear from you. Do let us know absolutely where you are from today. We'd love to know.
Yeah, please let us know. And the type of research that you might be doing would also be interesting to hear. So we love meeting researchers around the world. And the Sci-Affinity community is a new community for us. So we're looking forward to meeting all of you, finding out the kind of research that you do and where you do it from.
I can see India, Croatia, Huddersfield in the UK. That's a bit north of here. I'm down in Southampton. India, Belarus, fantastic. UAE, of course. Our friends at Sci-Finity Publishing are based in the UAE, so we should see some colleagues from that region joining us today as well, right, Scott?
Absolutely. And in just a moment, we're going to share some information about Sci-Finity Publishing so you can explore more on your own. We'll share some links to Sci-Finity's website, including some of their ethics statements and so on. You can explore their high quality journals as well. We'll post some links in the chat in just a moment. But for today's topics, this is an important topic, isn't it, Professor?
Absolutely, absolutely. We do tend to find that the researchers that we talk to, many different career stages, many different countries around the world, researchers do tend to be confused about research ethics. And so in this presentation today, in this webinar with our friends at Sci-Finity Publishing, we're going to talk about the importance of research ethics, as well as a number of other key topics as we go through our content today. Research data and data collection, the ethics of writing a research article and then citing it after it's been published, putting citations in to your research work, submission and peer review, which I don't know about you, Scott, but I find that this is one real area of confusion amongst researchers. And then, really importantly, copyright and ownership. We do find as well that talking to researchers, confusion about copyright, about open access publishing. If you do choose to publish your fantastic research open access, what does that mean in terms of copyright and ownership? And as usual, lots of time for Q&A, right, Scott?
Definitely. So don't be shy. Feel free to ask us your questions. Professor Dyke will be here to take all of your questions. You can pop them anytime into the Q&A box there, and we'll answer your questions at the end of the event. Today, we'll make sure to make some time for your questions. We find that a lot of researchers do have a lot of questions about ethics, as Gareth was saying, and we find that it's important to mention that we know that the vast majority of researchers are good and ethical people. And quite often it's unintentional errors that researchers make in terms of ethics. So we know that everyone joining us today wants to do well and are researchers who want to further science. So don't feel that we are somehow lecturing you on ethics, but rather helping you to navigate some of the complicated aspects of research and writing ethics. Isn't that right, Gareth?
Absolutely. If you don't know that you aren't supposed to be doing something, then you might do it by mistake is basically the message of much of our presentation today. It's about informing, sharing stories and information with the research community so that next time you come to write a paper or do some research and prepare it for submission to a fantastic international journal publisher like Sci-Finity Publishing, you'll know what to do. So lots of time for questions at the end of our event today. But first, a little bit of information about our friends. Scott?
Yes, our colleagues at Sci-Finity, and thank you again to them for letting us join or host this event for you today. So Sci-Finity is a publisher based in Abu Dhabi in the Emirates, founded in 2023. You can explore their high-quality journals here. I'll pop a link into the chat window so you can explore them for yourselves. And I know that this topic is very near and dear to the hearts of our colleagues at Sci-Finity. They wanted to start this event series together on the topic of ethics because they're committed to publication ethics. So we'll pop some links in the chat here. Feel free to explore their journals and take a look at their editorial board. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to them anytime. We'll also pop a QR code in at the end of the event so you can reach out to the Sci-Finity team and find out more about them and their publications.
Yeah, so lots of great journals, really well worth having a look. As Scott said, information here about the mission and values of Sci-Finity, the ethics statements, and very importantly, not all publishers do this, clearly available and clearly downloadable ethics and integrity guidelines so that when you choose to send a paper to one of these fantastic journals, you'll know what is expected of you. And of course, signatories to the fantastically acronymed ICMJE, International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. We'll come back to them a little bit later in our event, as well as COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics. I think we're just about ready to get started with our event today. Scott, what do you think? Should we get going?
Great, let's kick off. I'll be popping in and out here. I'll be engaging with the group in the chat there. So feel free to chat with me in the chat as you're listening to Gareth's talk today. We'll also pop in with a couple of polls and questions just to make sure everyone is still awake. And over to you, Professor.
Fantastic. Just a few quick things. My name's Gareth. I worked at a number of UK universities in Ireland for a number of years. I'm now most of the time based in Hungary. I'm the author of more than 350 research papers in peer-reviewed journals, lots of book chapters as well. And I've been a journal editor for more than 20 years, working with a range of big international publishing companies. So I've seen lots of things from both the author, the writer, the researcher perspective, as well as from the perspective of publishers. So hopefully the advice that we're able to give you in this event today, the information that we can share with our friends again at Sci-Finity Publishing will help you to learn a bit more about ethics in research and in publishing. So let's begin. Let's talk a little bit in the first part of our event today about why research ethics are so important. Let's begin with that. Ethics and being ethical as a researcher, having ethics in your research, collecting data, writing it up for publication, sending it to journals, very, 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 very important for a number of key reasons that you can see here on this slide. Maintaining trust in your research, ensuring that the funding that you get for your research from your government, from your funding agencies is properly spent, protecting your research subjects' health and rights. If you're a medical researcher, health science researcher, this is absolutely key. We also need to be able to trust the outputs that we get, that we see from research. So accuracy and reliability, giving people credit for the work that they do in your research team, collaborators, peer reviewers, editors is also critically important. And we're all about promoting scientific integrity because what this does at the end of the day is aid collaboration and speed up scientific progress, research progress, which is what we are, all of us, interested in doing at the end of the day. So ethics, very, very important. We're going to talk in detail about some areas of ethics in research and in publishing. But let's just have a quick look at what we like to call the research hamster wheel, the cycle of research and publishing that we, all of us, all academics, all researchers, go round and around and around throughout our research careers. And you might be looking at this wheel and thinking, hey, at the moment, I'm several different places on this wheel with my research, with my ideas, because you come up with an idea, you've got to get funding for it, you've got to collect data to test that idea, you've then got to pick a journal to submit your research to, you've got to write the paper, of course, submit the paper for peer review and eventual publication, and then you've got to promote the research after publication. And I don't know about you, but definitely when I was a full-time researcher, I could probably say that I was simultaneously doing most of these different things at any one given time in the research cycle. We've all got lots of plates spinning, lots of balls in the air, but ethics and being careful about how we do all of these elements of the research and publishing cycle are absolutely key. And so for that reason, in this event today, we're going to go round the wheel a little bit. We're going to talk briefly about various ethical considerations, guidelines, principles, what's expected of you as a researcher at different stages of the publishing life cycle, of the publishing wheel, the funding, the data collection, open access journals and avoiding predatory ones, the ethics of writing, citing, plagiarism, and the use of AI tools in your research, writing and publishing, submission and peer review, and finally, the ethics of copyright and publishing, which, by the way, is not something that gets talked about a great deal. And certainly when I was a researcher, I had pretty much no idea about this from my own perspective as a researcher. What does it mean for the copyright of my own research when I send that off into an academic journal? So, as Scott will attest, this checklist, what we like to call the finer research checklist, is an important part of ethical considerations when you begin the research process. Are you being finer in your research when you pick a topic, for example, to work on? Is what you're doing feasible? Is what you're doing interesting? Is what you're doing novel? Is what you're doing or going to do ethical? The research topic, the research question that you've chosen to address, and is it relevant? So when selecting a research project or a research topic or a research question, it's important to just have a quick run through of the good old finer checklist when you begin the project. And it's important to note that ethics is in there. It's key as a step that we must pass through as researchers to write and publish our research. So do keep these principles in mind when planning a research project. Follow the relevant guidelines. And of course, we've already shown you those in the context of the guidelines of Sci-Finity Publishing. COPE, Equator, ICMJE. Perhaps your institution has an ethics advisor or an ethics board. Protect your subjects. Critically important, in particular in medical, health sciences, research. Get informed consent. Protect private and personal data. We'll talk about hacking in a moment, but no cheating with the data, no hiding data, hacking data, falsifying data or figures, and using AI and AI tools ethically. Don't steal, goes without saying really, but of course, if you don't know some of the rules of copyright, you may not know that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, like taking a figure, for example, from somebody else's previously published research. Happened to me. I'll tell you about it in a minute. State the authorship on your articles truthfully. Credit your co-authors. No ghosting or gifting authorship, and submit ethically. Only one journal at a time. And we'll talk in a moment about avoiding those fake, predatory open access publishers. And of course, finally, conflicts of interest. You've got to declare them. For example, you've received funding from a pharmaceutical company and you're publishing a piece of research on one of their drugs, that's a clear conflict of interest. So you must disclose all of this information in the submission process. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But of course, there are a number of places that you can go to get access to guidelines around ethical research and publishing. For example, your target journal. Sci-Finity Publishing have all of this information for you on their website. Your university's policies, the Equator Network, which we'll talk about again in a moment. Good old COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, a fantastic resource for researchers. But I must admit, when I was working as a researcher, I had no idea it even existed. So do check out the COPE website, publicationethics.org, as well as things like the Singapore Statement and ICMJE and GPP3 guidelines for medical studies. And as Scott mentioned at the beginning of our event today, any questions, please put them in the chat, or feel free to get in touch with us later. We'll be able, happy, willing to answer any of your questions in follow-up from this event today. So the Equator Guidelines are a great place to start if you're doing medical, health science, or other kinds of technical research, because they have already on the equatornetwork.org provided you with guidelines, checklists for example, case studies, qualitative studies, observational studies, systematic reviews, and the different kinds of types of research that you might do. So it's well worth having a look. Any kind of science research, any kind of STM research that you're doing, have a look initially at the equatornetwork.org. There's probably a guideline, a checklist in there that will be useful for you to download, have a look at, and align your research, your data collection against. It's a great starting point. So the Equator Guidelines for Common Study Types, very, very important. So that's the end of part one of our presentation today, the importance of research ethics in your writing and publishing generally. Let's get a bit more specific now as we move around that good old hamster wheel and talk about data collection. Things to do, things to know about, things to think about when collecting and analyzing research data, which of course should be shared with everybody. If you publish a piece of research, open access, or in a more traditional paywall journal, you should always share the data upon which your study is based. That's critically important. Many journals will ask you to do that anyway, and you should do this for transparency and reproducibility in order to promote collaboration, cross-disciplinary work, public trust and accountability, data reuse and efficiency, and compliance with journal funding agency policies. Very, very important in order to share your data with the world. Publishing open access. Why that is important. And you're going to be respecting people's rights to safety and privacy as you think about why and how your study might involve people, human subjects. Get permission from an ethics committee at your institution before starting. And that's a key consideration because it is a requirement at almost all international medical and health science journals. Your paper will get rejected if you don't have a prospective ethics statement from your institutional ethics committee, for example. Does your study have assigned groups? Register the plan. Have you obtained full permission from participants? Make sure people have agreed to join the study. Have you anonymized all of that personal information, personal details, making sure to protect the privacy of participants? And you must safeguard data as well after it's been collected. Very important. And again, Sci-Finity Publishing has guidelines on all of this. If you'd like to get in touch, we can share that with you at the end of this event. And I know Scott's going to come back just now. We're going to have a look at a quick quiz on this particular topic. Scott, how are we doing?
Doing great. Just engaging with our guests in the chat here. Let's try a quick pop quiz. So we sometimes get called out on this question. So we'll see what our guests think is the correct answer for this. So the question is it ethical to try analyzing your data in different ways until you finally get the results that you want? Let's launch our poll here. So you can click on the poll results here. Just a moment here. Okay, I'm launching the poll. So let us know what you think. Is it okay to do this? Keep trying to analyze your data in different ways until you get the results that you want. Let's see what our guests think.
Keep on cooking the results, keep on analyzing the results, keep on massaging the results. What do you think? What do you think?
Think we're giving away the answer here, but there is some context to this question, and we have had a few guests ask us about this, so we'll see what our audience thinks today.
It's really, really important because these kinds of a serious point to do with this is that it's not always possible to identify if this has happened after the study has been completed. So in the peer review process, as we'll talk about a little bit later, it's often very difficult to identify how and whether data has been collected in an ethical manner. Scott?
Okay, let's check our results here. So it looks like our poll results suggest that 74% of our guests feel that this is not okay, and 26% feel that this is okay. Well, it's important maybe to look at the context of this question. Professor, what are your thoughts? Is this ethical practice?
Well, no, let's have a look. It is not, of course, ethical practice to do this. You've got a hypothesis in mind. You've got a question in mind that you're testing with your data collection. Of course you do. That's how science works. That's how hypothesis testing works. But you must collect data to test that question and analyze that data in a fair way. You can't keep on analyzing it in slightly different ways until you get the answer that you want or that you expect. And as we mentioned a moment ago, this is problematic in the peer review process because it's often quite difficult to identify this kind of thing. So it's the onus is on you, the researcher, to not do data hacking, as we like to call it, or data dredging, where you keep on stirring the pot until you get the result that you expect, right, Scott? We see this often when we talk to researchers.
Right, and I remember getting called out, full disclosure, when I was doing my dissertation, I was called out on this by my advisor for sort of, refocusing the analysis to, to just sort of nudge the results one way or the other is obviously not, in general, it's not ethical practice. There are some specific contexts. I know some guests might have some in mind, but generally, not a good idea. And as we'll see coming up, there are different ways that people will try to hack their data.
Well, do let us know in the chat if you have a specific example where you might not agree with this. We'd love to talk to you about it a little bit later on. But generally speaking, right, don't hack those data analyses. And there are a number of different ways that this could happen. Data dredging, as we've talked about, fishing expeditions where you go out and you find data and only report on data that really does fit with your study, hacking that P number. Keep on running those analyses until you do get what looks like a significant P number. Harking and cherry picking, of course, as the name suggests, you're going around like picking again data from your data set or from your sample that fits with your predetermined hypotheses. And I do kind of like that many of these have a food related theme to them, but that's kind of beside the point. It's important as a researcher to be ethical, report your data, work on your data in an ethical and transparent way. So what about writing up the paper and putting the work together for submission to a journal, to a publisher like Sci-Finity Publishing, the ethics of writing and citing? And we get loads of questions about this from researchers around the world. I'm sure we'll get some today in our event. If you are writing up a research paper, a kind of common rule of thumb is that you should cite papers if you've read them in the context of your research work. And always more citations are better than less citations. And that's a great way as well of showing that your work has been thoroughly put together and giving your work perhaps a better chance of passing through the peer review process. Review papers are especially useful in this context, and avoid citing your own work too much. We do get this question as well, and reviewers may ask you to cite their papers in yours. That's also potentially unethical. We recommend tools like Mendeley, Zotero, Cite, AI-assisted referencing tools, and show as well that you're on top of the literature by citing older papers in your field as well as the most recent ones to give a grasp of your field, to show that you're on top of the research. Paraphrase safely. Remember to cite. Read your sources carefully. There are a number of reference management software packages you can use. I know Scott will be interested in talking about those a little bit later. Paraphrasing manually or using AI writing tools to help you do this. One great tip for paraphrasing from one paper to use in your paper is to translate that text into your own native language and then translate it back. Try changing the verb tense, the sentence structure. Move from active to passive or passive to active, because it's often safer to paraphrase in your research with a citation than to quote directly. And that also makes the paper much easier to read. It's not great to read through a paper with lots and lots and lots of quotations everywhere. Ethically summarizing and synthesizing sources, making notes on key messages, grouping your papers together in your reference manager so you can cite them in sets in your research articles, citing fairly in a balanced way so the work of previous researchers is clearly, honestly, and even-handedly presented. And we do also advise against overly aggressive or negative citation approaches. Even if you disagree with the work of Scott from last year, you don't need to say that it was terrible in your own research article. So that's generally something we recommend, to always be polite and constructive in the way that you put your papers together. AI tools are tools like typewriters, like word processors, like your laptop. They're tools to help you be more efficient, not ghostwrite your papers. So use AI tools to help you. ChatGPT, Jenny.ai, SciSpace, WordVice, Grammarly, and others, of course, to help you. Helpful for outlining, citation management, brainstorming, paraphrasing, grammar checks. Risky for generating references, writing full drafts, and replacing your own critical thinking. And again, I know Scott will want to say more about this a little bit later, because he's been working a lot with these AI writing tools, working out what's possible and what's not. But AI, it's a tool, not a ghostwriter. Sci-Finity Publishing will give you guidelines on what's expected of you if you are going to use AI tools to help you with the writing process. So here's a quick checklist for you, how you can use it ethically and potentially unethical uses of AI in research writing. So for example, grammar, style, paraphrasing, brainstorming, checking flow, managing and formatting text references, but generating references, submitting full AI generated drafts, rewriting the work of others without attribution, and not disclosing that you've used an AI tool. Journals have been using AI, publishers have been using AI for many, many, many years. They do it for things like similarity checks. So for many years, if you submitted a paper to a publisher, it will have been run through an AI similarity checker like Turnitin, Authenticate. And a 10 to 20% similarity is often acceptable depending upon the field and journal. But ask if you have questions. There are common overlaps in the way that research is written, in the methods, in the definition, in the citations, but red flags will be areas like the discussion copied from another piece of work, the results and conclusion. So expect to get this kind of feedback from publishers and disclose your use of these tools. And here we go with another quiz, and this is a really interesting one, very close to my heart. Scott.
This is an interesting one. Yeah, let's see what our guests think of this question. Is it possible to plagiarize yourself? Some people might think, no, of course, it's not possible. If you wrote something, then you own that writing. Or Others might think, yes, it is possible to self-plagiarize. Just because you wrote something does not necessarily mean that you own it. And again, there are some contextual um, factors here, but generally, let's see what our audience thinks. Is it possible to self-plagiarize? Yes or no?
And this brings us into an area of if I didn't know I couldn't do it and I did it, is that really a piece of unethical behavior in writing and publishing? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Yeah, this is a really, really interesting one.
Now, in your case, Professor, you are a voluminously well-published researcher, which I am not. So there's more risk, I think, of someone such as yourself in your field to run into this issue.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about it again in just a moment when we come on and talk about copyright, because it's actually a little bit different depending on the kind of journal or book or article that you have previously published your own work in. But yeah, let's first have a look at the results of this poll, see what we
Okay, looks like 17% of our guests today feel this is not possible to plagiarize yourself. 83% said that they feel that this is possible. Professor, what's the correct answer here?
Well, of course, it is possible to steal from yourself. It is possible to plagiarize your own work. And I was unaware of this when I did this back in the day, back when I was working as a researcher. I thought I made that figure, I made that map, I took that photograph. I don't need to give myself credit when I republish it in another paper. But of course, you do need to do that. If you publish something in earlier work, you need to cite yourself in later work. We'll talk about what that means in practice in a moment. But yes, it's possible, and you can get, as I did, in trouble for not doing it.
Indeed, and we have a follow-up question coming up a bit later on this topic as well. So back to you, Professor.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit in part four about the ethics of submission and peer review, which is also a very, very important area in the context of the ethics of research and publishing. And we're all familiar with this process. We've all been through this loads of times: submission, peer review. You get comments back from the editors, from the peer reviewers. You've got to revise the paper, resubmit it again. Let's hope it gets accepted. Congratulations. Then it goes into production and then it goes out to be published. But what happens over the course of this process is important, starting with submission. Watch out for fake journals. Some open access journals, because of the model, the paid for APC article processing charge model of open access publishing that's applied by many journals and publishers, there's a business there to take money like from researchers. So there's lots of fake predatory journals out there trying to cheat you out of your money and research, and they're quite sophisticated. So it can be difficult to spot the difference between a real journal and a fake one. So have a look at the website, the indexing, the editorial board. Are they publishing regularly? Are the articles peer reviewed? What about the fees? Never pay anything for publication for an APC for open access publishing until after your paper has been accepted. That's really, really important. And lots of spam emails full of empty promises are characteristic features of fake journals. Real journals, the ones you want to publish your work in, are listed in COPE, in the DWAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, in OASPA, and so on. They've got clear and robust peer review processes. Their fees and policies are fair, clear, and explained in detail. And members of the editorial board are known in their field. So, for example, Sci-Finity Publishing has this information for you on their websites of each of their journals. You can go and have a look at that, as well at these resources. I know Scott will be pasting these in the chat. Think, Check, Submit, publicationethics.org, the DOAJ.org, DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, and OASPA as well. So, before you submit your paper, your fantastic research, your hard-won, hard-done research, have a look and see if any of it's been published before. Check prior publications. What about preprint policies? Does the journal accept submissions that have previously been preprinted if you've gone ahead and done that? What about conference material? Does presenting this work at a conference affect your ability to submit to your target journal? Embargo rules. Does your journal have embargoes on previously shared research? And really, is your work just a thinner slice of a fuller study? We call this salami slicing. It's another unethical publication practice, as well as translation. Is this work that you're planning to publish now simply a translation of a previous publication? You need to cite the earlier work. I'm not saying that you can't do it, but citation is important. So do have a look at these checklists. Don't try to publish these kinds of research articles or research based upon these kinds of things unless you have copyright permission. Translations, summaries, excerpts, blogs, reports, preprints, working papers, discussion papers, and conference proceedings. Any questions, get in touch with us, reach out to the Sci-Finity Publishing team, or ask us in the Q&A coming up shortly. It's usually okay to publish, but check carefully first. Then declare when submitting. If part of your research article is based on a university thesis, an assignment, an essay, a conference abstract or poster, a grant application, patents, or online trial registries. You can use them for sure in your published research articles, but you will need to declare them, talk about them, and even potentially get permission from the copyright holder to use them in your published work, even if the copyright holder is you. Which brings us on to part 5 in our presentation today, the ethics of copyright and ownership. I know it sounds boring, but if you're anything like me, as a researcher, I had no idea about this kind of thing. Very, very important, right, Scott?
Right, same here. I was very naive about this as well until I began working with colleagues who are very closely allied with the publishing industry, and I learned so much very quickly. And I'm thankful that I did because otherwise I might have created done any of the blunders that we're talking about today. So it is a very complicated minefield, the business of ownership. So we have a quick question for our guests today, a question about copyrights. If you write an original work, does the copyright automatically belong to you, at least initially? So let's launch our poll and see what our guests think today. If I write something now, I write a paper, does the copyright, initially at least, automatically belong to me as the writer?
And I must admit, I really must admit that, 10 years ago, I would not have known the answer to this. I would have had no idea. And I wouldn't even have thought, if I'm honest with you, Scott, I wouldn't even have thought that a research paper or the research that I was doing involved copyright.
Right. And until now, we've talked a lot about respecting the work of others and making sure that we ethically cite others. So this question is more about protecting one's own work and deciding if or when to give away ownership of that work. So let's see what our guests think. So 54% of our guests, let's just share the results here. 54% of our guests, excuse me, 52% said yes, if you write something, it initially automatically belongs to you, and 48% said no. What is the answer to this question, Gareth?
Isn't that really interesting? An almost 50-50 split between yes and no. Actually, if you write something, um, a research article, a publication, you do own the copyright initially, at least until you sign it away, right, Scott? And that depends on the publishing model that you choose for the research article, which again is something that I would have had no idea about either in my research career.
Right. It depends if you're publishing in, of course, an open access journal, of which Sci-Finity has a number. So it is interesting, and we have to be careful how and when we sign away the rights to our work.
So you do something, you collect data, you write it up, you create a piece of intellectual property. That could be a preprint, that could be a conference poster, that could be an abstract. It could be a research article that you submit for publication to Sci-Finity Publishing. Initially, until you sign away the copyright, you own it until something else happens. So it's very important to know this as a researcher. And as we've mentioned several times, Most people don't know this. And as you saw in our poll results just a few moments ago, 50-50, protecting your work is important, and understanding what you're signing up for when you pass your work to a scholarly journal is also important. Know your rights. The copyright is yours until you sign it away. That may vary depending upon your institution, your workplace, your university. When I worked in the UK, for example, my university actually owned the copyright, the IP of all of the work that I did when I was working at the university. If you work for the US federal government, then they own all of that copyright and all of that IP. But check as well what you have in place with your employer. Know the journal's policies. Check and understand and follow their policies when submitting, because actually publishers vary quite a lot on this point. You're going to get a document object identifier when you preprint your work or when you publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. That's your marker. That's your marker that shows that you are the author, the IP holder for that piece of research. And of course, one of the big advantages of considering or publishing open access is that you get to keep the copyright to a greater or lesser extent, depending upon the kind of license that the publisher gives you. You get to keep the copyright of your work, which is often a big plus of open access publishing. And don't forget to consider preprinting your work, because this establishes your primacy and documents your discoveries early. Also absolutely fantastic. So preprint ownership is important. Have a look at your journal policy. Does the journal that you're now submitting to after preprinting accept preprinted research? Most do, by the way. What about your future publishing rights? What about citation and use? And what about Creative Commons licenses? We'll talk a little bit, I'm sure, in our Q&A about this, but your copyright will dictate your author rights. Licensing options, not so important for me as a paleontologist, but if you're a pharmaceutical researcher, you may be interested in your licensing rights going forward, going down the road. Publisher agreements. What about reuse and sharing? That's got to happen with proper attribution, usually citation, as we've talked about in this presentation today. And also, how long are you going to be protected for? So, can you share your research after publication freely? Yes, you can. You hold the copyright. Yes, if there's a CC-BY-NC or CC-BY open access license associated with the research. But as is the case in traditional journal publishing, almost always, you've sent your work to a publisher that is putting it behind a paywall, selling that content to libraries and universities behind a subscription. They hold the copyright. So you may be restricted in what you can do with your own research in the future. Restricted to fair use, usually like quoting a small part with proper credit. But you might find, if you publish in a traditional journal, that actually the publisher holds the copyright, and you're going to have to go and ask them if you want to republish from your own paper. I know, sounds crazy, but that's the situation. So do check your copyright carefully, and this is why it's important to know about this as a researcher in the context of ethics, of course. So what have we talked about in our event today? Well, today we've talked about 5 key elements of research and publishing ethics. Why it's important: the ethics of research data collection, writing and citing, submission and peer review, and the ethics of copyright and ownership. And if you've enjoyed this event, then hopefully we'll be back to do more. But now it's time for the Q&A, and I see lots of activity in the chat box in today's event, Scott. Lots of questions, right?
There are some great questions coming in. We'll try to get to all of them best that we can with the time that's left. I'll go from in order of the questions that I feel are most often asked by our guests today. So there are several questions or several guests who are asking about self-citing. I know you have some thoughts on this, Gareth. So is there an acceptable amount of of self-citation that we can do as researchers? First of all, is it generally a good idea? And if so, to what degree is it acceptable to cite your own previous work?
It depends. It depends entirely. I mean, if you are working in a field in which you have done a considerable amount of previous research, then you must cite your own previous research because what you're doing as a researcher when you write papers for publication and review papers, especially the case, is you're summarizing that body of knowledge building up to the point where we are now, that state of the art, as we call it. So you may very well need to cite yourself, but the citations in your paper must be balanced. They must be balanced. So you can't just cite your own work. You can't just cite research that you agree with. That's something that certainly should be picked up in peer review, but there's no answer to that question, really. There's no right or wrong answer. But if you're going to cite your own work, balance that with citations to other researchers as well. I would strongly argue, but that's a fantastic question. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that we often get asked. And we were saying earlier that it's possible to self-plagiarize, which would be one extreme where you don't cite yourself. And then now we're saying, there might be limitations on how much to cite yourself. So somewhere in the middle, I guess, is the golden mean, as they say in mathematics. Questions about preprints. A couple of our guests have asked us to explain a bit more about what is a preprint publication and why would we want to publish something as a preprint. Any thoughts on this, Gareth?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question and definitely an area of considerable confusion. Again, it depends upon your research field, because in some research areas like engineering, physics, mathematics, for example, pre-printing research has been around for many, many years and is normal in those fields of research. And a preprint really is any piece of research in any state, any early form that's provided openly for other researchers to look at prior to peer-reviewed publication. So you could put a preprint on your own website. You could put a preprint on a preprint platform like Research Square, like Archive, bioRxiv, medRxiv, and all of the associated archive servers. There are many, many preprint platforms. Some publishers provide them for researchers, and many are subject area specific. We can provide you with a guide to all of the different preprint platforms. But critically, if you preprint your work on a platform, you're going to get that document object identifier number that stamps that early stage work and ties it to you. So it's a good idea because let's say you do a conference talk, preprint those slides. Nobody can steal, nobody can go off and write up a paper based on those slides. They've got to cite your preprint. So I would say they're really a good idea. Increasing numbers of researchers are doing this, again, depending upon your subject area. But that's what a preprint is. Gives you the opportunity to get feedback from the community on your research prior to peer review. Great question.
It's a great question. For me, the two standouts are primacy and early feedback on your work. I think those are two reasons that you might want to publish a preprint. Thank you so much, Gareth, for your answer. And thanks to our guests for your questions about preprints. Another related question as far as copyrights. One of our guests asks, if we publish in open access, does this mean the author has the copyright of the published manuscript? Well, great question. As Scifinity is a publisher of open access journals, Gareth, what does it mean if we publish in open access? Do we retain the copyright?
Yeah, almost always the answer to that question is yes, but check the kinds of Creative Commons licenses, the open access publishing licenses that your publisher is supporting because it does vary. And we talked about CC BY-NC in this presentation. That's a license that a publisher gives that means that you own the copyright for non-commercial purposes. So you could publish open access with a publisher that gives you the copyright to the research other than for commercial applications, which may not be what you want. If you're, let's say, let's use my example of a drug pharmaceutical discovery researcher, you will not want to be publishing your work with a publisher that gets to keep the commercial component of the research license. What you really want is to publish open access and retain everything. And there are a very large number of publishers that allow that. I would encourage you to do check Scifinity Publishing as an outlet for your research, because why should the publisher get to keep the license for the commercialization of the research? Do check though. Don't just publish in the first journal that comes along. Don't just publish where your supervisor published last time. Check these issues before you publish. Scott?
Great question, and thanks for your insights, Professor. We've got a number of great questions here. We'll try to get to all before the end of the talk today. One of our guests asks, is a mentor required at the beginning of writing a research paper to tell us about the ethics? Well, this is a great question. Where do we get the ethical requirements, depending on the context? If I'm not sure if our guest is a pre-doc, if you're working on a dissertation, or if you are an active researcher, but um, great question. So, who do we look to for ethics guidelines before writing a paper?
Well, again, that's a fantastic question, and it really depends on where you're working, your university, your research group, your community, because it hugely varies. Will you get this kind of training as part of your doctoral studies? Will you get this kind of training from your university? Will you get this kind of training from your publisher? And so for these reasons, because we know that the level of training for researchers around the world varies hugely, we are here working with Scifinity Publishing to help. So I'd answer that question by saying from presentations like this one, that's where you can get this kind of information. And please, if you have any issues or any confusion, or you need to ask us specific questions about your research, do feel free to get in touch with us after the presentation, either through LinkedIn or directly over email. Scott, I saw a number of questions about certificates and about recordings as well coming up in the.
Yeah, great questions. And we will be sending certificates to everyone attending tonight. We'll send the certificates out 24 hours after the event finishes. So, about 24 hours. Check your inbox. We'll also be sending a link to the full video recording, which is browsable. You can scan through if you missed anything. You can always flip through. It's got chapters, a full transcript. So, if you missed anything, I know there's a lot of information we're throwing at you tonight. We're packing a lot into 1 hour. So, if you missed something, no worries. We will be sending the full recording to you along with the certificate tomorrow. And you will also see our return email address. If you have any questions that were not answered, we'd be happy to try to field them or pass them along to the Scifinity team. There are some questions here today, which are great questions. For example, about disclosing the use of AI tools, for example. We can give you some general information on that, but most importantly, it depends on where you're submitting. So I think a lot of questions tonight as far as ethics guidelines, disclosure guidelines really depends on where you're submitting. If you're thinking about submitting to one of the Scifinity journals, definitely reach out to the Scifinity team to find out what's allowed as far as your use of AI and so on. But in general, it's necessary to always disclose if you're using those tools, whether you're using them for writing, data analysis, and so on. So to all of our guests who asked about AI, feel free to reach out to the Scifinity team or your target journal, or of course, your university for guidelines on those. But yes, back to videos and transcripts and certificates. We'll be sending everyone full video and transcript 24 hours from now. So thank you for asking. A great question here from a guest, Gareth, is using the same data for another research paper unethical?
No, not necessarily. It's not. Like, you've got a data set, you can mine that data set for as many research papers as you like, but you must provide citations to previous uses of the data set. I would say that's very, very necessary, and also make the data available. What you do see sometimes is researchers talking about a data set and mining it for different publications, but not providing access to that data. And that really should be picked up in peer review. So I would say absolutely no problem. Just be clear, open, transparent about what you've previously done with the data, where it's been talked about before. I've even seen examples of researchers publishing one paper on one interpretation of a data set and then revising that interpretation in subsequent research papers because, of course, research is a journey, it's a progress. So, no, I mean, absolutely no problem with that. Just be open and cite what you've done and where the data can be found. Great question.
Excellent question. You really can't go wrong with full disclosure and proper citing. In fact, those are absolutely essential at all times. Great question. And thank you, Professor, for your insights. Here's a great question. It might be beyond the scope of our fields of work here, but it's a clinical question. And our guest asks, a researcher discovers that a participant has provided false information about their medical history, which could potentially impact the validity of the study's findings. What step? I love this question because this researcher is definitely thinking the right way, um, an ethical way. What steps should the researcher take to address this issue while maintaining the integrity of the study and respecting the participants' rights? So again, participant provided false information, and our guest is asking, how does that affect or impact the integrity of the study and what steps should they take next? Great question and a superb ethical question to ask. We're not clinicians. This might be a question for the Sci-Finity team and their work in clinical research. Gareth, your initial thoughts?
Well, again, like I echo what Scott's just said, like we are not experts in this particular area of research or indeed in this kind of ethical dilemma. I would say it depends upon whether the study's been published or not, what stage the study is at. I mean, if it's pre-submission, pre-clinical trial submission, whatever, and you discover this, then you still obviously have the chance to do some revisions to the data set. However, if the work has been published or it's moved like onto a preprint platform or into a later stage where it's being disseminated somehow within the community, then you have a more tricky situation to resolve that could involve removal of parts of the article or even retractions of parts or all of the article. But again, that's a really, really great question. I would encourage you to have a good look at the COPE guidelines, publicationethics.org, because they have lots and lots and lots of case studies on their website. You can search the website for similar situations that you may be in as an author. Can I add an author to a study after it gets submitted? Can I take an author off a study after it's published? What to do in situations like that. So that would be my starting point with this. And then, maybe your hospital or your research organization has an ethics advisor or an ethics committee that you can talk to. Fantastic question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. I would encourage you reach out to the publication and again, full disclosure is always the best way, but yeah, maybe outside the scope of what we can answer for you today. But thank you for the excellent question. We have perhaps time for two quick ones. I'm going to jump on this one first. Our guest asks, one of my case reports has been published in a local journal in my country. Is it possible to publish it now in an international journal? Great question.
Yes, absolutely. The answer is yes, but you will need to show something different in the subsequent publication. You can't just republish the same article again. That shouldn't happen, but you could extend the study, do more, turn it into a different question, combine it with some additional data, make it into a new publication. That would be absolutely fine, whilst citing the original source, of course, which is good for you. It's good for your citation rate. But yeah, be clear about the kind of genesis, the evolution of this project. You should not be republishing work that you've published previously, really, even if that means translating from one language to another. You should be creating new pieces of research that build on earlier studies. So that would be my answer to that fantastic question. Great question. The questions we're getting today are really, really cool, right?
They're excellent, and they show the care for ethics that researchers are showing. I love that. We talked earlier about salami slicing. That would be one extreme. We also talked about pulling from a broader data set. So somewhere in the middle is the ethical way to publish your work or republish your work. Thank you for your question, and thank you so much, Professor, for your answer. I think we're almost out of time, but I do see a lot of questions, and this might be a segue to a future event together with the Sci-Finity team. But I do see a lot of questions about the ethics of peer review, particularly in the behavior of the reviewers themselves. And we know that this is an issue. We do know, unfortunately, that there are issues such as regional bias and country bias and so on. Maybe this is a great opportunity to have another session together with the Sci-Finity team where we address some of the issues dealing with peer review. Gareth, your thoughts on the ethics of being a peer reviewer briefly before we go today.
I mean, it's human nature, right? I mean, everybody is human. And of course you're going to get problems or problematic comments in peer review. Add my citations to your paper. Do X, Y, and Z if you want me to write a positive review. Just to give you two quick examples. If you have an issue as a researcher in peer review, you feel you've been treated unethically or unfairly, your editor is the person to talk to. Don't feel that you can't write to the editor. Editors are very approachable. They'll appreciate it. They are policing the peer review process. And so if you write to them and say, Dear Dr. McCleary, Gareth told me he'd write a positive review of my paper if I cited 6 of his research articles. I mean, that shouldn't be happening. The editor must police the process. But yeah, like we can open a whole can of worms with this question, and we just don't have time.
Perhaps not today, so hopefully in a future event. And speaking of future events, it's been an absolute pleasure engaging with this group today. Thank you all so much, our guests, for joining and taking time. Again, if you're joining us from the Sci-Finity community, thank you. It's been very nice to meet everyone. If you're joining us from our regular Sci-Train community, thank you always for coming back and joining our events. And hopefully you've discovered a new high-quality publisher to publish in. So big thanks to the Sci-Finity team for having us host this event today. And thanks to you, Gareth, as always, for providing your insights. As I always say, I always learn a lot doing these events together with you. So thank you so much.
It's fantastic. It's been a great fun to do this. Always, Scott, great to work with you. And I'm loving the fact that the scifinity.com QR code has a little dinosaur in the middle of it. So do scan that QR code if you'd like to get in touch with the Sci-Finity publishing team. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And thank you, Gareth.